Wales is the third oldest national team in the world, and yet despite this, they've only made 3 international tournaments since 2021. So today, we'll be talking more about their origins and recent rise. Also, apologies for any of my Welsh pronunciation throughout this entire video. In 1872, the first ever international match was held between England and Scotland. 4 years later, adverts were placed in newspapers proposing a Welsh side be formed to play either Ireland or Scotland in rugby. And in came Kenrick, Samuel Llewellyn Kenrick, a solicitor who helped form a club in North Wales called Druids FC. Kenrick responded to the adverts but pushed for a football match instead. Ignoring the critics of South Wales, he moved quickly and accepted an invitation to play Scotland not even a month after reading the advert. Recruitment was pretty straightforward, with trials being held to find suitable players. Not to mention, the 29-year-old godfather of Welsh football himself was going to play as well. And then came the day, March 25th, 1876, the birth of Welsh international football. History in the making. In the following year, Cymru played its first ever international home match in Wrexham and lost 2-0. The Dragons returned to Glasgow for another match in 1878, where a fixture clash with the Welsh Cup final had many players refusing to travel. As a result, Wales was forced to produce a side that was nowhere near the level of Scotland and went on to be ass-blasted 9-0. Things got better though in 1879 on a snowy pitch in Kennington, where William Davies scored Wales' first ever goal in a 2-1 defeat to England. Then to begin the 1880s, the English travelled to Wrexham and scored 3 unanswered goals. However, in the final 10 minutes, Wales scored twice through William and John Roberts, but were unable to equalise. William Roberts also scored 2 weeks later against Scotland in a 5-1 defeat. However, in 1881, history was finally made when a single goal from John Vaughan gave Wales their first ever international win against England. They then lost 5-1 to Scotland again in Wrexham a month later. At time. It's the international break, and what better way to fill in the void than to play Raid Shadow Legends, our sponsor for today. Fellas, let me tell you something about Raid. Introducing Doom Tower. Someone wasn't enough of an alpha male to defeat the evil creatures, so the monsters have been locked up for a few thousand years in this huge tower. But oh no! The locks are as formidable as the Northern Mariana U20s team. The tower is starting to fail, and now you and your army of worthy champions must defeat the bosses and climb to the top. And this month, Raid's just released 2 giant new features, Awakening and the new brutal dungeon, the Iron Twins Fortress. But hold on, because there's even bigger news. Raid just released a super-powered legendary version of everybody's favorite champion, Death Knight. Sensational. And everyone can get him for free just by logging in and playing for 7 days between now and October 27th. That's a whole 7 days more than Bamba Dieng spent at Leeds and Nice combined. You can also use the promo code displayed here for a bunch of free items to instantly level up your strongest champion all the way to level 50. And if you haven't started Raid yet, no worries. Click the link in the description or scan my QR code here and you'll get unique bonuses worth $30. We're talking a new champion, Vergus, 200k silver, 1 energy refill, 1 XP boost, 1 ancient shard. I mean, there's nothing else I could have possibly wanted in life. But these bonuses are only available for the next 30 days, so click the link in the description, download Raid Shadow Legends today. I'll see you in the game. 1 year later came a new opponent to the international ring, Ireland, who in their first ever fixture were eviscerated 13-0 by England. Wales took this opportunity to beat up on the little guy for once and crushed the Irish 7-1.
I'm stronger, I'm smarter, I'm better. I am better!
But they weren't done there. In a meeting against England in Wrexham, Cymru came back from 2-1 down to win 5-3 against their bitter rivals. These friendlies continued until 1884, when an annual football tournament between England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales called the British Home Championship was formed. For those of you who may be confused, Ireland were under British rule until 1922, and they weren't a republic until 1949. The tournament, though, would see a roller coaster of highs and lows for Wales. They finished bottom of the competition after losing all 3 matches in 1886. 2 years later, Cymru avoided defeat to Scotland for the first time in their history with a goalless draw. Then in 1895, the Dragons finished a nation-best 2nd place thanks to the likes of James Traynor, Billy Lewis, and the emerging Billy Meredith. We've already talked about the mustache, we are not doing it again. The momentum, though, was carried into the next edition where Wales dismantled Ireland 6-1. But then, the Welsh were pulverized by England losing 9-1. The result was especially frustrating due to Wales' difficulties in calling up players from English teams. It became such a problem that the Football Association of Wales put forward a motion that national teams be granted the right to overrule clubs on player selection. to which England's FA ignored. To begin the 20th century, 6'1" keeper LESGOO was awarded his first cap for Wales. 2 years later, he maintained the first ever Welsh clean sheet against England in the home championship. Then in 1907, Wales won their first title thanks to goals from Billy Meredith, Grenville Morris, and Lot Jones. But right before World War I, Wales finished bottom once again. After the war, it had been discovered that 8 players who had represented Wales had died in action, including Les Roos. Despite an early death, Roos remains one of the most iconic names in Welsh football history. During the peak of his career, Roos was considered the best keeper in Britain due to his death-defying bravery and great reflexes. In 1920, after drawing twice, Wales then beat England in a competitive fixture for the first time since 1882 thanks to goals from forwards Stan Davies and Richard Richards. But it was neither who had the spotlight. That went to a now 45-year-old Billy Meredith, who had a brilliant display in his last match for Wales. Meredith finished his international career as the country's all-time top scorer with 11 in 48 appearances. The inside forward was known as the Welsh Wizard for his brilliant dribbling, passing, and finishing. The Dragons won another 2 titles in the 1920s. However, due to deterioration of the domestic scene in the country, the national team suffered a massive decline by the end of the decade. Around that time also, Wales, along with the other British nations, severed ties with FIFA due to a dispute over payments to amateur players. In 1930, in an attempt to force international matches to be scheduled on days not clashing with league fixtures, the Football League introduced a new ruling which prohibited its members from releasing any players for international fixtures. Which is great and all, but not if you're playing Scotland, who had their own league. But despite being forced to call up 9 debutants from the lower divisions and amateur levels, Cymru managed a 0-0 draw. The Football League and other home nations then reached a compromise a year later. Now countries would be required to provide 21 days notice for a player's release, which again is great and all, until you realize that Football League clubs were only obliged to release English players. So as a result, during the 1931-32 home championship, all of Wales' requests were rejected and they finished bottom. However, there was one breakthrough in Eddie Paris, the first ever black player to represent Wales. In 1932, Cymru finally gave in and agreed to hold matches midweek in order to avoid fixture clashes. That decision proved to be for the best as Wales went on to win 2 consecutive championships. Around that time as well, the Dragons traveled to Paris and played their first international match against a non-home nation's opponent. Wales then won another championship in 1939 and then played the French again right before the Second World War. Soon after the war, Wales rejoined FIFA in 1946 and then voyaged on an overseas tour 3 years later. The Dragons lost all 3 fixtures, however, when Belgium came to town in 1951, Wales piled on 5 goals, 3 of them coming from Trevor Ford. The Welsh entered World Cup qualification for the first time in 1949, where they failed to make the 1950 tournament through the home championship. However, the national team bounced back and won their first post-war championship in 1952. The winning squad contained a lot of bright talent, including Swansea's own Ivor Allchurch. Shortly after, though, the Welsh found themselves on struggle street once again. From May 1953 to November 1954, Cymru went winless in 9 straight matches, leading to their subsequent failure to qualify for the 1954 World Cup. However, 1955 saw Wales start to improve, and with the emergence of John Charles, Cymru defeated England for the first time in 17 years. Wales also played Austria near the end of the year. Prior to the match, the Welsh had actually played Das Team a year before where they lost 2-0, but more importantly, where they pissed off the Austrians with their physical playstyle. So in the return fixture, the Austrians were determined to match the Welsh physicality, which logically made sense. You don't want to be bullied. But with the referee being as useful as Herb Dean when he sees a man being beaten to death in the ring, absolute anarchy ensued. Fouls happening left and right. In fact, there were probably more touches on opposing players' knees than the ball, resulting in injuries to 8 players. Ultimately, Austria won 2-0 as players were left with scars, gashes, and even a broken tibia. In 1957, Wales didn't make the 1958 World Cup. Meanwhile, in the African and Asian region, Israel qualified by not playing a single game due to quite literally every nation refusing to play them. Because of this, shortly after, FIFA invented a rule that made it so teams had to play at least 1 game in order to qualify. What followed was an intercontinental playoff between Israel and a randomly drawn second place finisher amongst the 8 different European groups. Belgium was drawn first, however, they refused to play Israel as well. The second team to be drawn out was Wales, who accepted the terms and all of a sudden revived their qualification hopes from the grave. Cymru then defeated Israel in a 2-legged tie 4-0 on aggregate and qualified for the World Cup in one of the most unlikely of fashions. Wales was drawn into a group with Mexico, Hungary, and Sweden. Mexico was considered the weakest nation in the competition. Hungary was a shell of their former selves after the revolution in 1956 saw stars like Ferenc Puskás and Sandor Kocsis opt to not return to their home country for many years. And Sweden? They were the hosts. Before their opener though, Wales nearly experienced some deja vu when the Italians, salty about not qualifying, decided to play the Coppa Italia over the summer. John Charles at the time was Juventus' top scorer, and the club refused to release him for the World Cup.
Couldn't care less.
But eventually, after multiple attempts, he finally convinced Juve to let him go. And so, with the likes of forward Ivor Allchurch, winger Cliff Jones, defender Alf Sherwood, keeper Jack Kelsey, and the main man John himself, manager Jimmy Murphy had one objective: get 3 draws. Things, however, did not start well as a member of Hungarian Parliament scored in the 5th minute. Nevertheless, John Charles headed home a reply to give Wales their first point. Next was Mexico, where the Welsh were severely underwhelming. Regardless, they still got their draw. Finally was a battle against host Sweden, which ended in a goalless draw, which put Wales tied for second in the group with Hungary. A playoff tiebreaker between the two followed, with Wales coming out as victors thanks to goals from Ivor Allchurch and Terence Medwin. With that result, Wales advanced to the quarterfinals, but at a cost. During the playoff, John Charles had been bruised and battered to the point that his knees were practically black rather than blue. As a result, he was deemed out for the next round fight against the highly favored Brazilians. The Welsh did all they could in spite of their missing star, but in the end, the incredible underdog story came to an end when a 17-year-old Pele burst onto the scene. The young Brazilian's goal was one of his many that would be replayed an infinite amount of times throughout the decades to come, while the improbable Welsh run felt more like a hoax with every year that passed as its story was forgotten in the isolated plains of history. Wales failed in their quest for 2 consecutive qualifications and didn't make the big dance in 1962. The national team also attempted to qualify for the 1964 European Championship, but just like the World Cup, failed in doing so. In 1964, Cymru appointed a new manager in Englishman Dave Bowen. His first qualification campaign was for World Cup 1966, which didn't see much success. And 2 years later, during a South American tour, Ivor Allchurch made his final appearance against Chile. The once dubbed Golden Boy of Welsh football retired as Wales' most capped player and was tied for all-time top scorer with 23 goals. Around that time, John Charles retired from international football as well. The striker was prolific with both feet and had an aerial threat barely anyone could stop. But not only that, his quickness and technicality allowed him to create goals as well. Known as the gentle giant for his stature, Charles is regarded as one of the greatest British players of all time, with his name sometimes even being classed among the likes of Pele and Maradona. Euro 1968 qualification combined the results of the 1966-67 and 67-68 editions of the British Home Championship, in which a depleting and decrepit squad again crashed out. There was a glimmer of hope though in 1968, where the Welsh drew with West Germany right before World Cup 1970 qualifiers. Unfortunately though, during the qualification campaign, the Welsh came face to face with a familiar foe, clubs refusing to release players for international duty. The 1970s though started kindly with another shared home championship, which again gave the national team some optimism going into Euro 1972 qualifiers. That optimism was short-lived. Things only got worse from there as Cymru finished bottom of the home championship 4 times in 5 seasons and also didn't qualify for World Cup 1974. Fortunes changed though when the FAW appointed Mike Smith. Under the Englishman, the Dragons won their Euro 76 qualification group and advanced to the playoff round to face host Yugoslavia. This was the end of the road for Wales, but not without controversy. Because of some dodgy refereeing in the second leg, the Welsh crowd got increasingly irate and made several attempts to enter the pitch. At the final whistle, it got so bad that the ref had to be escorted off the pitch by police while Welsh fans were attacking the Yugoslavian players. Because of the violence, the federation was initially banned from international football for 2 years. However, after an appeal, the ban was reduced to a 20,000 Swiss francs fine, and all home games were to be played at least 200 kilometers from Cardiff. Starting around 1977, the FAW before matches started playing the Welsh anthem, Henwlad van Handai. I tried. They requested the anthem be played in an upcoming England fixture at Wembley, to which the English FA refused. Infuriated by the decision, the Welsh players decided to take action. During pre-match ceremonies after England's anthem God Save the Queen played, the English players broke off for the game. The Welsh players, however, had a different plan in mind. If the band weren't going to play their anthem, they'd stand and sing it themselves. As the players started singing, English FA officials desperately tried to move the players, but no one was budging as boos could be heard from the Wembley crowd. Damn, I guess they've been doing this for a while, huh? This nationalistic pride was then translated beautifully on the pitch, where a Leighton James penalty earned earned Wales their first and only win at Wembley. Since that day, the anthem has been sung passionately with great volume by Welsh players and supporters alike before every match, creating one of the most electric atmospheres in international football. With a rather impressive run of form going, supporters had hopes of qualifying for World Cup 1978, and things were going decent with Wales just hanging on. However, in their second to last match against Scotland, Wales gave away a penalty, lost 2-0, and had their hopes buried.
Well, there was a hand up there, Idwell. I don't know why, but there was a hand up. There it goes, isn't it?
Now hold on a second. During Euro 1980 qualifiers, Wales started well, winning 3 of its first 4 matches. The national team followed that up by going winless the rest of the way. Then came the 1980s with a new manager and former captain Mike England. He started off hot, defeating England 4-1 at the racecourse. It was the first Welsh home win against the English in 25 years, and 4 days later saw the debut of 19-year-old Ian Rush. England helped the Dragons start off brilliantly in 1982 World Cup qualifying with 4 straight wins, placing them top of the group. And following a goalless draw with the Soviet Union, all Wales needed was just a single win to qualify. Czechoslovakia got the upper hand in the match after, but next was Iceland, who lost to Wales 4-0 in the previous matchup. So with the return fixture being at home, this was certainly in the bag. Mike England tried again in Euro 1984 qualifiers, and with the help of a now 21-year-old Ian Rush bursting onto the scene, Wales was top of their group on the final day. Needing either a Yugoslavia loss or draw to Bulgaria, everything was going Wales' way, and they were now just minutes away from a trip to France. However, in the first minute of stoppage time, Yugoslavia's Lubomir Radanovic continued the Yugoslavian tradition of shattering Welsh dreams. While the result was excruciatingly painful, the Welsh were starting to see a bit of a golden generation brewing up, including the likes of 24-year-old keeper Neville Southall and 21-year-old forward Mark Hughes. With the newfound talent, Wales entered 1986 qualifying with confidence, but they were immediately humbled by Iceland, again, and then received a slap to the face in Seville. Nonetheless, Wales kept their heads up and won 3 straight thanks to goals from Ian Rush and Mark Hughes. Those results also single-handedly saved the Federation from bankruptcy. With one more match remaining in Scotland against Cardiff, Wales needed a win in order to qualify. Mark Hughes drew first blood in the 13th minute. However, a handball gave the Scots a penalty that sent every Welsh player a one-way ticket to their couches for 1986. However, in Euro 1988 qualifiers, Wales again started in fantastic form, going unbeaten in their first 4, and then went on to finally achieve their long-awaited ambition. Following the departure of manager Mike England, Wales hired former player Terry YORATH as interim. While optimism was there for 1990 World Cup qualifiers, luck was not, as Wales drew into a group with 3 nations overseeing some kind of golden generation. But despite finishing bottom, a 0-0 draw in West Germany raised more than 250k in revenue for the Federation, providing Cymru financial stability for the first time ever. They then took this opportunity to improve the grassroots level of the game and also bring back the U21 team. Further advancements to the game in Wales were made when the first professional domestic league in the country was formed in 1992, which in turn provided more structure outside the few Welsh clubs playing in England. The positives kept coming, as in Euro 1992 qualification, they went unbeaten in their first 3. Their next match was at home against the now unified Germany, who were enjoying a 16-match unbeaten streak at the time. The run may have intimidated many before them, but not Wales, as they ended the streak through a goal from Ian Rush FIFA 15 style. And if you thought that was crazy, the Dragons followed that up by beating the Brazilians 4 days later. However, in a return fixture against the Germans, the Welsh suffered a brutal beating and then eventually lost the group after Germany won out its last 2 games. Nevertheless, with some very impressive results, it was looking like the Welsh golden generation would finally achieve qualification in the near future. Alright, maybe not. Though as we've seen time and time again, the Dragons fought back to stay alive in World Cup 1994 qualifiers. First, they ate up the Faroe Islands 6-0. Cyprus was next, and a single Mark Hughes goal was enough. And after a loss to the Belgians, Wales took immediate revenge in Cardiff, utilizing 2 different generations. Now 32-year-old Ian Rush became Wales' all-time top scorer, and 20-year-old Ryan Giggs added a first to his account. The fiery passion of the Dragons continued on, grinding out draws to Czechoslovakia twice, which leads us back to where it all began, a return fixture in Cardiff against Romania on the final day with the trip to the US in sight. For the Welsh golden generation, it was their last chance to right all wrongs and leave pain in the past. But again, they were in a must-win situation, and this time it was against a highly attractive Romanian side led by the enchanting Gheorghe Hagi. However, fearless as they had been before, the Welsh did not give in. They shifted the momentum, and eventually Dean Saunders found the equalizer. Then 2 minutes later, Gary Speed won a penalty kick, something that had previously ended a couple Welsh campaigns in cruel fashion. But here was one to rewrite history. Paul Bowden with the nation on his shoulders. hits the crossbar. Minutes later, Wales rued their missed golden opportunity and Romania scored at the other end. Again, pain and devastation for the Welsh. After the game, manager Terry YORATH sat in a stairwell and wept. Neville Southall, having made the first mistake, wanted to quit the sport altogether. Paul Bowden suffered sleepless nights trying to cope with the haunting feeling of letting his whole country down. And John Hill, a fan, would not return home after being struck and killed by a flare. This was truly the worst day in Welsh football history. John Toshak took over the national team in 1994 and lasted one match. Mike England then returned for a second stint to lead Wales in Euro 1996 qualifiers. However, following 2 losses to Bulgaria and a 5-0 embarrassment at the hands of new nation Georgia, he was sacked. Bobby Gould then took over the rest of the campaign and Wales finished tied for bottom. Ian Rush then retired his record-breaking 28-goal international career not too soon after. Gould's time as manager was considered a dark period to fans. His tactics were awful and his attitude towards players was even worse. As a result, he had many falling outs with players including the likes of forward Nathan Blake, midfielder Robbie Savage, and Mark Hughes. Things got even grimmer when Wales lost to 4th Division side Leyton Orient. But finally, after a catastrophic qualification campaign and a 4-0 defeat to Italy, Gould resigned and the federation turned to Mark Hughes, who was still playing Premier League football at the time. Hughes' first attempt at qualification to a major tournament was Euro 2000, where Wales finished 4th, conceding more goals than last place Belarus. In the 2002 World Cup qualification campaign, the Welsh started playing matches in their sparkly new stadium. It didn't help with their results though. However, during Euro 2004 qualifiers, the Welsh had a bit of a resurgence when they kicked off their operation with a 2-0 win against Finland. Then the 3-time World Cup winners came to town. Italy was expected to destroy the Welsh, but in the 11th minute, Simon Davies shocked everyone. Eventually, the Italians equalized, however, they were never able to stop the Craig Bellamy masterclass, as the young Newcastle winger dribbled past Gianluigi Buffon and scored the winner in one of the most famous nights in Welsh football history. Although Italy returned the favor a few months later and won the group, Wales still had an opportunity to qualify if they could get past Russia in the playoff round. In the first leg, the Dragons held strong for a 0-0 draw in Moscow, giving them faith. Unfortunately though, it again turned out to be false hope as heartbreak happened in Cardiff for about the 6 trillionth time. But not without controversy though. Russian midfielder Yegor Titov tested positive for a substance called bromantin, an anti-fatigue drug that has been on the World Anti-Doping Agency banned list since 1997. As a result, Wales made an appeal to UEFA, which made its way to the Court of Arbitration of Sports. However, the appeal was denied, stating one failed test was not sufficient evidence to suggest a coherent Russian doping strategy. Yeah. About that. After a dismal start in 2006 World Cup qualifying, Mark Hughes left and John Toshak returned for a second time. Nothing changed though, as Wales finished 5th in their group. Euro 2008 qualifiers saw the same disappointment, with Wales barely even beating San Marino away from home. However, during the same campaign, fans got a sense of the new promising generation when a team consisting of 5 players eligible for the U21 squad drew 0-0 with Germany. That squad included 17-year-old winger Gareth Bale, who a year prior became the youngest ever goalscorer for Wales. 2010 World Cup qualification saw more of the same promise, with 18-year-old midfielder Aaron Ramsey scoring his first international goal. But despite the new waves of talent crashing onto the shores of Europe, Gymru failed in their quest for the 25th straight time. John Toshak then called it quits after Wales lost its opening Euro 2012 qualifier versus Montenegro in 2010. The FAW, as a result, turned to U21 coach Brian Flynn, who was immediately thrown in the bin after losses to Bulgaria and Switzerland. On December 14th, former Leeds, Newcastle, and Everton midfielder Gary Speed was appointed head coach. Speed made 85 appearances for the national team and more than 50 of them as captain. The former midfielder was known for his hunger, work ethic, and professionalism, and now he was carrying on these values as an aspiring head coach looking to modernize the national team. Speed's first competitive match was a 2-0 loss against England in Euro 2012 qualifiers, where he captained 20-year-old Aaron Ramsey. The defeat extended Wales' losing streak to 6 straight, dropping them to an all-time low 117th in FIFA rankings for August 2011. Around that time also, there was actual discourse on social media about how Wales would never qualify for a tournament again and should instead join forces with England and Scotland. Man, how did that work out for you guys? Nonetheless, Speed kept moving forward with confidence in his youngsters and was rewarded as Wales won 5 of their last 7 games in 2011. And despite Gymru not qualifying for Euro 2012, Speed had the whole nation believing after an emphatic 4-1 victory against Norway. And as a result of the incredible form, Gary Speed's Dragons soared from the nation's rock bottom all the way to 45th in just 2 months.
Good afternoon. The Welsh football manager Gary Speed has died at the age of 42. The Football Association of Wales has told the BBC that it appears he had taken his own life.
When news first broke out about the tragedy, the football world was left stunned. Just a day prior, many who knew him were texting Speed, and now less than 24 hours later, they were begging Gary to call back in hopes these were all just sick rumors. But there was never a call back. He was truly gone. Before their matches, players who were friends of Gary or lucky enough to represent their country under him were left numb trying to process everything. Many of whom were not sure whether to play on or not, but knew they had to because that's what Gary would have wanted. Gary never once hinted at anything being wrong. He had only ever shown this giant smile, brighter than his old Leeds shirts glistening in the hot sun. Gary Speed was loved by everyone who met him, and his legacy lives on in all hearts of whom he touched. Every single story you hear about the midfield great is one reminiscing upon his amazing qualities as a player, coach, but most importantly, as a human being. Please, if you are suffering from depression, talk to someone. I promise your problems aren't meaningless, and I promise you are not weak. 2 months after the tragedy, the Federation hired Chris Coleman. Coleman and Speed had been friends since age 10, with them both growing up playing football together in the Welsh youth ranks. So when Cookie, as his childhood friends called him, took the job of his late friend, the responsibility was almost too much for him to carry. Coleman was a former player who had his career ended by a car crash in 2001. 2 years after, though, he led Fulham to a 9th place finish in the Premier League as manager. It was as big of a surprise as his appointment. However, after a move to Real Sociedad, his managerial career suffered and Coleman became somewhat of a laughingstock. The first 12 to 8 months of his stint as Wales manager were tough, and understandably so. The players were demotivated, depressed, and Coleman approached the job the wrong way as he was trying to replicate what he thought Speed would have wanted. At the end of the day, Coleman had disregarded his own beliefs. He just wanted to keep everyone happy. And as cruel as it may be, everyone learns that's just not how life works. The players didn't believe in his game plan, and the national team lost their first 5 matches in 2012. And with every loss, the team grew more and more depressed. However, in the Forest of Dread were holes of shining light. In the last 10 minutes of a World Cup 2014 qualifier, now 23-year-old Gareth Bale single-handedly gave Wales a needed boost in morale. Then in 2013, again Wales' new age showed what they were capable of when Aaron Ramsey scored a late equalizer against an emerging Belgian golden generation. And slowly but surely, that spark of youth got Chris Coleman out of his own rut. The turning point for him came in 2014 when Coleman was close to being sacked after a scrappy 2-1 win in Andorra in Euro 2016 qualifiers. The manager thought to himself, if he was going out of the exit door, at least he would be doing something he believed in. So for the first time in Coleman's managerial career, he switched to a back 3 against Bosnia, which earned Wales a draw. The result didn't have much significance, but now Coleman was thinking for himself and working to the team's strengths how he saw fit. Coleman knew switching to a back 3 would get the most of his midfield. He also realized it was the best way of providing a platform for the Welsh X-Factor, Gareth Bale. Bale at the time was already on the verge of overtaking the great John Charles in the all-time top scorers list at just age 26. Shortly after, Wales returned to a back 4, went on to beat Cyprus in the next qualifier, and followed that up again by drawing in Brussels. Then the back 3 returned against Israel, where this time the formation stayed after proving an absolute success. And with Speedo in their thoughts, ignited a fire in their hearts.
Oh, Nangolo, it's a terrible header, straight to Bale! 1-0 Wales! Gareth Bale strikes again! And delirium across Cardiff City Stadium!
In their second to last qualifier, Cymru lost 2-0 to Bosnia, but with Cyprus beating Israel, it meant Wales officially qualified for Euro 2016. They were finally back in an international competition for the first time in 58 years. Wales was drawn into Group B with Slovakia, Russia, and England. The majority of the squad consisted of men who grew up together and played through the youth ranks. There were the likes of goalkeeper Wayne Hennessy, defenders Ben Davies and Neil Taylor, midfielders Welsh shabby Joe Allen, Joe Ledley, and now the famous celebrity killer Aaron Ramsey. There was also Captain Ashley Williams, and finally the X-Factor himself, Gareth Bale, whose 19 international goals had him tied for 7th in Wales' all-time top scorers list. But the biggest story going into the tournament were the passionate Welsh fans and the Red Wall, who made the most of their time and created seas of red in every French city. It wasn't just the fans having fun though, so were the players. Chris Coleman wanted his players to treat their time in France like a holiday with the boys basically. That way the players could relieve a lot of the tournament pressure and create an unbreakable bond with one another. The team got coffee together, played golf after training, and even had ping pong tournaments. Cymru's first match would be in Bordeaux against Slovakia, as the whole team had one thought in mind: do it for Speedo. After an incredible display of defending by Ben Davies, it took just 9 minutes for Gareth Bale to score a brilliant free kick. However, Slovakia then replied in the 61st minute through substitute Ondrej Duda. But 20 minutes later, Aaron Ramsey slides a sneaky pass to Hal Robson-Kanu, who rolls it into the back of the net and hands the Welsh a win on their European Championship debut. Next was the match that had been talked about since the draws in December: England. As you've seen throughout this entire video essay so far, these two nations have had plenty of history with one another. And while in the past, England have usually been the more superior side, the gap was swiftly closing between the two nations.
How many England players will get into this current Welsh team?
None.
The first clear chance went to England, where Raheem Sterling gave his classic world-class finishing into Rosette. The English continued to bombard the Welsh defense but failed to find a breakthrough. Then near the end of the half, Gareth Bale from 35 yards out stuns the English with the help of Joe Hart's incompetence. However, England equalized early in the second half through Mr. Chat get banged himself. The Welsh from there held down the fort for as long as they could, but unfortunately in the dying minutes, Daniel Sturridge scored the winner for England. Immediately after the final whistle, Coleman told his distraught players there was no training the next day. Instead, they would go out for lunch. And then less than 24 hours later, after some burgers on the beach, the team put the result behind them. And eventually, they'd have the last laugh too. Wales' last group match was against Russia in Toulouse, and the Dragons were completely dominant. Cymru won 3-0 thanks to goals from Aaron Ramsey, Neil Taylor, and Gareth Bale. And with England's underwhelming 0-0 draw with Slovakia, Wales went on to win the group. They played Northern Ireland shortly after in the round of 16, where after an hour of scrappy football, an own goal from Gareth McCauley sent Wales through to the next round. The Dragons then faced their biggest challenge yet, but a familiar foe, tournament favourites Belgium. From the get-go, the Red Devils went at Wales' necks and eventually found the back of the net thanks to a typical Raja 9 goal and goal. I mean, seriously, has he ever scored like a normal goal, like, you know, inside the box? Having now been forced to attack and open up their shape, this should have been the downfall for Wales. However, this was actually the turning point of the match as Cymru started controlling the game with dictating confidence. And after numerous close opportunities, Captain Ashley Williams thumped home the equalizer in the 30th minute. Wales honed this conviction into the second half as Moses Robson-Kanu parted the seas with the most elegant yet ferocious Cruyff turn I've ever f***ing seen. Finally, to cap off a famous night in Welsh history, Sam Vokes sent the stands rushing to the corner in ecstasy with a brilliant header. Unlike the legends before them, this new age team, now blooming full of what potential was honed by Speedo all those years before, were going to play in the semi-finals of the European Championship. However, it was again at a cost. The Welsh would be without one of their key performers in Aaron Ramsey, who was suspended due to his yellow card accumulation. It unfortunately proved to be a huge loss, with Wales struggling to break down the strong Portuguese defense, and they eventually were defeated 2-0. The loss left the Welsh in disappointment, because the team truly believed they could win it. But again, just like after England, frustrations and hurt were put to the past as players took an afternoon the next day to reflect on their journey. And after a night of singing and dancing until the birds started chirping, players flew back to Cardiff, where they were greeted by all those fans who were watching them back home. Before the beginning of the tournament, no one believed in Wales, except for the Welsh people. And with every win, the national team paid those supporters back with one of the most incredible underdog stories the European Championship has ever seen. Before Euro 2016, Wales was ranked 10th in July 2015 FIFA rankings. They were actually higher in October, attaining 8th, putting them above England for the first time ever. But because of Cymru's ranking in July, they were placed in pot 1 for World Cup 2018 qualifiers and were drawn into a fairly favourable group. Qualifiers started 2 months after the Euros, and Wales carried on their momentum with a 4-0 victory against Moldova to kick off the campaign. But following the great start, the Welsh dropped off and picked up 5 consecutive draws. However, 17-year-old Ben Woodburn put the stagnation to rest with a banger that helped catalyze Wales' winning ways again. After 2 more victories, the Welsh were in second on the final day, needing just a single point against the Republic of Ireland to guarantee a spot in the playoffs. Unfortunately though, much like 1985 and 1993, Cardiff witnessed heartbreak once again, and soon after, the amazing Chris Coleman era came to an end. 2018 may have not seen Wales in the World Cup, but it did see them in China, and after scoring a hat-trick against the citizenship merchants, Gareth Bale surpassed Ian Rush, becoming Wales' all-time top scorer. A few months after competing in the Brazilian B team tournament, Wales appointed former Welsh player and Manchester United legend Ryan Giggs. Giggs led his men in the 2018-19 UEFA Nations League, where Wales just missed out on winning their group. His first qualification campaign was Euro 2020, and he helped the Welsh qualify for back-to-back European Championships for the first time ever. And who could ever forget that flag, which caused Spanish media to erupt into a meltdown. Euro 2020 ended up being postponed because of the big bad virus. However, the 2020-21 UEFA Nations League carried on, with Wales winning their group, going unbeaten throughout. Cymru's last 2 fixtures were managed by an interim coach though. Why? Because it turns out Ryan Giggs is a piece of shit. The interim head coach in question, though, was former Wales defender Rob Page. Page started his coaching career in 2014 at Port Vale, shout out Jordan, and 2 years later moved to Northampton Town. Then in March 2017, he took over as manager of the Wales U21, U19, and U17 teams. From there, he immediately changed how Wales nurtured its youth by bringing in other coaches to manage the U19s and U17s. Because how efficient could it possibly be to have one coach manage all age groups? Wales in the past has been known to fast-track any player the coaches thought had potential and expose them to better opposition as soon as possible. A prime example of that being, of course, Gareth Bale, who made his senior debut at 16. But under Page and a now more efficient system, Wales has been able to nurture far more players, including the likes of striker Brennan Johnson and winger Rabi Matondo. The national team didn't see the same incredible success at Euro 2020, but still saw a decent run. The Welsh team of young and old managed to surprise again, finishing second in a group many predicted they'd finish last in. Cymru's run came to a halt, however, when they lost to Denmark in the knockouts. In World Cup 2022 qualifiers, Wales was drawn into a group with Belarus, Estonia, Czech Republic, and Belgium. For Gareth Bale, who is now 32 years old, it would probably be the last chance at potentially featuring at a World Cup. The Welsh opened qualifying with the match against the Belgians, who got their long-awaited revenge.
Wales national team.
I'm coming to kill you!
Nevertheless, Wales rebounded with a win against the Czech Republic. They then followed that up with a last-minute Gareth Bale winner in Kazan. However, the run dealt a huge blow when the Dragons could only acquire a single point from Estonia. Next were the Czechs again in Prague, where the Welsh had to overcome a Danny Ward error to rescue another point. So with 3 matches remaining and a game in hand, Wales needed to start maximizing on points to nab the playoff spot. And they followed suit with a win in Estonia and an annihilation of Belarus. Then on the final day, needing just a single point to overtake the Czechs, Wales grabbed a massive point against the Belgians thanks to a Kiefer Moore equalizer. 10 days later, the Dragons were drawn into Path A of the playoff round with Austria, Scotland, and Ukraine. Now to quickly go over how the new playoff system works, there's 2 semifinals and a final. Whoever wins the final of the path earns a berth to Qatar. It's pretty simple. The playoff campaign began for Wales against Austria in March 2022. However, before kickoff, the Welsh players requested singer Dafydd Iwan perform the team's unofficial anthem, Yama o Hyd. Yama o Hyd was released in 1983 in response to Thatcherism and its existential threat to Welshness. That year, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher led the Conservative Party to its best election result in Wales. Then the following year, Thatcher lied to the public about the number of mines she planned to close in order to tackle a mine workers' union strike. She claimed that there would only be 20,000 voluntary redundancies to the coal industry, when in actuality, it was 70,000.
Ding dong, the wicked bitch is dead.
Following her victory against the strikes, fewer than 40% of all Welsh households were headed by someone in full-time employment by 1986. But this wasn't the only time Welsh identity was under threat. Far from it. Yama o Hyd's chorus translated to English means, "Despite everyone and everything, we are still here," which refers to the oppression the Welsh people and their language have suffered throughout several centuries. In 1280, Wales was politically annexed by the British and haven't seen a self-governing political unit since. Then in 1536, King Henry VIII put a ban on the Welsh language, which lasted until 1942. And yet, in spite of it all, the Welsh identity has remarkably survived. Since its release, Yama o Hyd has become a symbol of the togetherness and strength of Welsh pride. The song reminds not just Welsh people, but everyone to celebrate who they are, where they came from, and to never take their culture for granted. The semi-final began with Austria slicing through Wales' shaky defense. Luckily though, the shot hit the crossbar. Then in the 24th minute, Gareth Bale with one of his signature free kicks sends Cardiff into an absolute frenzy. And during Bale's adrenaline-filled celebration, he went up to the camera and said, quote, "Suck that." This was in reference to when Spanish tabloid Marca called Gareth Bale a parasite that sucks the money out of Madrid every year. From the very day Gareth Bale became a Madridista in 2013, he's been public enemy #1 to Spanish media, because all they saw was an outsider who came to Real Madrid for a world record fee of €100 million. But Bale kept moving forward in spite of it all, and gave Madrid supporters across the globe 2 iconic moments. That goal against Barcelona in the Copa del Rey, and that goal against Atleti to break the deadlock and help Madrid achieve La Decima. The Welshman continued to impress in the seasons after, however injuries started to stack. In his first 2 seasons, Bale missed just 4 games, but in the 2015-16 season alone, he missed 15. It got even worse in 2016-17 when he missed a whopping 29 matches. As the years went by, Bale continued to suffer numerous setbacks and could never replicate that same explosive consistency as before, which resulted in the winger slowly falling out of favor to younger emerging stars, and of course, the Spanish media going full send to criticize him while he was down. However, just like when he first joined, he kept moving and helped the club win yet another Champions League title. But the journalists still had the audacity to portray him as a villain. However, it's been a completely different story throughout Bale's international career. Up to this point, since 2006, Gareth Bale has scored 37 goals for Wales. His role has not only been a speedy and powerful winger, but also a figure who has redefined and revived Welsh football. Despite the constant struggle to qualify for major tournaments, supporters still have hope until the end no matter the opponent because of their hero. A warrior who will stop at nothing to give his all for his nation no matter what. His impact on Welsh football is one that inspires the next generation to follow his pathway. Gareth Bale has produced moments of brilliance for both club and country. The difference is, unlike at Real Madrid where he's left to be sucked dry by those in the media and the fans influenced by them, the Welsh people show Bale nothing but love and would do anything to have his back. Because Gareth Bale knows exactly what it means to play for the Welsh national team. So tell me, who's the real parasite? Wales prevailed 2-1 past the Austrians, putting them just 1 match away from qualification to World Cup 2022. The match would be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, in Welsh football history. And their opponents? Ukraine, another nation with an incredible story playing with ultimate passion. Ukraine started positively, creating multiple chances, but the Welsh defense held strong. Then 30 minutes played, Wales won a free kick in a dangerous spot, and Gareth Bale, with a little luck again, sent Cardiff into madness. But we have seen this scenario plenty of times before. Was the elation truly going to last this time? With Ukraine chasing the game, the match opened up, resulting in a back and forth battle between 2 hungry nations fighting for the pride of their people. Wales had their chances on the break, and Ukraine had numerous close opportunities. However, every Ukrainian chance was stopped in its tracks by either the strong backline or veteran keeper Wayne Hennessy, who made 9 saves that day. And finally, relief. For decades, parents and grandparents would recall the great Welsh team of 1958 to their children as if it was a once-in-a-lifetime fairy tale. And Cardiff had seemingly turned into a place of eternal suffering for the national team. Generation upon generation would see some of the most cruel and heart-shattering ways for Wales to miss out. But a team built upon the blueprints of Gary Speed, harnessed by Chris Coleman and Rob Page, changed all of that in just a decade. And despite everything and everyone, Wales is still here. And now, after 64 grueling years, are going to the World Cup. So that is the rise of Wales, and it'll be interesting to see how they perform in the World Cup. They're going to be playing Iran, the US, and the big one, just like Euro 2016, England. I just wanted to say, sorry for the lack of consistency. I've never been truly that consistent, but now it's just been kind of all over the place. And it's because of these video essays, and hopefully that kind of changes in the next year. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you've reached this point, thanks for watching. But of course, a massive shout out to all our patrons, including Janos Barash, Centily Hank Dennis, El Fabi, Miliaway009, Alex Rod, Ulta, Amin Suamez, Arnulfo Martinez Jr., Daniel Ortiz, Darkwolf476, Francisco Hernandez, Jax206, Juan Leras, Kev FM, Windin Mintang, Parafocus, Rory Burns, Subscribe to Tendetem, The Motor Drive, Tomicus, Trevor Batson, Triple GK, Vanilla Mexican 17, Victor, Carlo SG, Chris Damasceno, Declan Malloy, Dominic Griffin, Emmett Shea, Lewis, Jordan Clavitt, Mohamed Al-Balkhail, MX Wee, Patrick Barley, President Pulisic, Tom Little, and Unbroken Persona. If you'd like to join the Patreon, there'll be a link down below and up in the annotations. You can follow my Twitter if you'd like, follow my Instagram if you want, follow my TikTok, trying to get to 15,000 there, and of course you can follow my semi-active Twitch. But until then, I'll see you guys.